For the past several years, the US and Turkey have been on the opposite sides of many issues. Everything from the war in Syria to disputes over military hardware, Ankara and Washington traded public barbs that often questioned their six-decade-old alliance. But recent military gains by the UN-backed Libyan government against the warlord Khalifa Haftar seem to have opened a new window to get relations back on track and to check the aggression by Haftar's illegal militias, who enjoy wide support from Russia, the United Arab Emirates and Egypt. That opportunity was highlighted by Turkish President Recep Tayyip Erdogan during a recent phone call with President Trump. Erdogan signaled that a new era could stem from cooperation in Libya. Although many sticking points remain between the two NATO allies, can Libya prove to be a turning point? Will it show Turkey and the US that working together will always prove more beneficial than being at odds? And joining me now from Maryland, Glen Howard, who is the president of the Jamestown Foundation, a research institute based in Washington, D.C., and Kadir Ustun, who is the executive director at SETA Foundation's Washington, D.C. office. Gentlemen, welcome to Straight Talk. It's good to have you on the program. Kadir, let me begin with you. In a recent phone call, Turkish President Recep Tayyip Erdogan, referring to the latest developments in Libya, said a new era is about to begin between the United States and Turkey, and the two have come to some agreements without specifying what these were. What's your take on that? What is your take on that?
The United States has been largely out of the picture in the Libyan scene. As you remember, during Obama's time, U.S. actually helped topple Gaddafi, but ever since there's been a civil war and there have been warring parties. Recently, Turkey intervened on the side of the UN-recognized legitimate government in Tripoli, and it has been confronting Russian-backed forces, Haftar's forces. So the U.S. has been out of the picture, but I think Turkey wants U.S. to be more involved. We read yesterday that the foreign minister and Pompeo, Çavuşoğlu and Pompeo were told to work together on Libya. So I think a new momentum could start where you'll see the U.S. more involved in Libya, a bit more visibly at least.
So, Glenn, is this a goodwill gesture to Turkey, or the U.S. just wants to drive a wedge between Turkey and Russia? What's at stake for the U.S. for the time being?
I think the United States is growing awareness and recognition that Turkey's success on the battlefield in Libya is kind of changing the entire strategic situation, and that those victories on the battlefield and the retaking of Bani Walid and Tarhuna were moments where it really signaled to the United States that that Turkey's kind of recipe for how to resolve the conflict is starting to be successful. And it also reflects U.S. being growing concern over the Emirati involvement in Libya with Wagner, hiring of Wagner mercenaries. Over 2,000 of them now are on the ground, according to U.S. Africa Command. So there's a growing awareness that this is becoming kind of a proxy war. And the United States is being, I think, convinced now that Turkey is doing the right thing. It's kind of holding its own and helping Libya. And I think that's a very important development.
Yes, just recently, Foreign Minister Mevlut Çavuşoğlu made a statement on the two-country relations. Let's listen to what he had to say about it. Then we'll continue to talk.
Compared to last year, I can say that our relations with the US are getting better. We received the biggest support from the US after our military operation in Idlib in Syria. Also in Libya today, the US wants to be more active. So our president suggested President Trump works with us together, and he supports this idea too. We can work together in Libya. It is important for the future of the region.
So, Glenn, how would this new phase of cooperation work? What would it look like?
Well, I think that it's kind of a wait-and-see approach. I think that Turkey's been adamant that it will not seek an ultimate battlefield destruction of Haftar's forces, that they'll keep following what I call the Bismarckian model, which is success on the battlefield followed up by diplomatic discussions. And I think that recipe is starting to kind of show its way here. And I think it's the larger picture that when you look at the situation in the Eastern Mediterranean, and, since the end of the Cold War, the United States really hasn't had a configuration for how to work with Turkey. And I think that this period of retrenchment by the Trump administration and the withdrawal from Syria and also from Europe is going to lead for more cooperation with Turkey and the United States, because Turkey is really kind of showing the path forward on how to work and operate in the Eastern Med and following its own, what it would perceive as its own vital national security interests in Libya, determined by the EEZ, the Exclusive Economic Zone that Turkey signed with Libya.
We know that there are several thorny issues between the two countries. Foreign Minister Çavuşoğlu also said that S-400 is a crucial issue but can be resolved easily. But the U.S. support for YPG terror organization in Syria and FETO, the plotter of 2016 failed coup attempt, cannot be tolerated. Yet we heard for the first time a U.S. state, Alabama, shut down a FETO-linked charter school. What's your take on that?
I think as you mentioned, there's quite a few serious issues that continue to be problems. But in a recent article that is yet to be published, I argue that the U.S. relationship with Turkey is strong and it will endure all these problems. And it has already endured. Of course, they're not going to come to agreement on the YPG PKK anytime soon, as long as U.S. supports semi-formally continues. And of course, FETO is a big issue. Turkey sees that as a proven slam dunk. These people were behind the coup, and the U.S. hasn't done enough on that. The recent case in Alabama you mentioned, I think attests to the fact that there's a lot more focus and information about this organization in the U.S. So we could potentially see more of those that would be more satisfying for Turkey.
Yes.
But as you mentioned, these conflicting interests and divergence of views will continue. But the U.S.-Turkey relationship is strong enough to overcome them, or at least live with them for a long time.
So, Glenn, do you agree with them? Has the U.S. policymakers, let's say, perception of Turkey's fight against the FETO terror organization changed? And if it changed, why and why now?
Well, ultimately, at the end of the day, it boils down to what the President of the United States thinks. And as Trump still remains the president, but I think that you have to understand that there's a bureaucracy inside the United States within the federal structures. It takes time for this type of things, crackdown and efforts to deter the FETO-linked organizations and Glen movement. That takes time, and I think they're working on it. It's not probably at the best and most fastest speed for Turkey, but I think there is some signs here of some progress as the shutdown of the Alabama school shows. I think that just needs to take time, but I think that there's just kind of a growing change in U.S. policy, foreign policy, that Turkey is really kind of in a way kind of leading the United States in a way that to try to help deter Russia in the Eastern Mediterranean. And the Glen movement is just a part of this whole greater part of this effort to understand Turkey's strategic interests. And there's been since 1991 a profound lack of that.
Having mentioned Turkey's strategic importance, President Trump's former National Security Advisor, John Bolton, has written a very controversial book about the president's conduct, which many dispute the contents. And there's a passage about Trump's personal relationship with Turkish President Erdogan and how Trump seems to be accommodating to the Turkish interests. Can you speak on that close personal relationship, and does it show that Trump really sees the strategic importance of Turkey with President Erdogan?
Well, I think that you have to understand that when Trump became president, a lot of people ridiculed him for his foreign policy. A lot of it was intentionally kind of twisted about what his views were. And when it comes to Turkey, you have to remember that the president has a gut instinct about Turkey. He looks at the map. Unlike a lot of U.S. policymakers, but he looks at the map. He understands the borders and geography. He knows that Turkey plays an important role, not just in the Middle East, but in Europe, and it's in a strategic location. And his gut instincts at the end of the day, regardless of S-400 and everything else, are to keep Turkey as an ally and to maintain that close personal relationship that he has with the president of Turkey. And I think that this has kind of been the stabilizing effect, despite Mattis and despite others in the U.S. administration, and Bolton, who had a profound disdain for Turkey, but it kept things still remain stable.
So, Kadir, if there is going to be a new phase of cooperation, which sticking points should be dealt with immediately? What are Turkey's priorities, in your opinion?
I think the spoilers in the relationship has been regional conflicts. There needs to be a more robust coordination mechanism between Turkey and the U.S. At the end of the day, they are NATO allies. But as we know, Trump has been questioning U.S.'s international commitments and its role in globally. And that has created an environment where Turkey has been unsure and about how to work with the United States. But we mention these issues all the time, YPG, FETO. FETO is a bilateral issue, but YPG in Syria, there's Iraq, there's Iran, there's Russia, there's Libya. There are many important regional issues that Turkey can work with the U.S. And I want to point out, for the last 20 years, President Erdogan has been able to work with many different U.S. presidents. So he has a way of understanding the U.S. and sort of having that dialogue, even though there were several years of serious, intense tensions, especially during last years of Obama, because of the YPG. I would say that tops the list still.
So what happens, Glen, if Trump doesn't get a second term in office? How would relations between the two countries look like? And do you believe that both sides calculate the risks likely to show up in the future?
Well, unfortunately, Brett McGurk is advising the Biden campaign, so I would not, I'd be very careful here about trying to make predictions about Biden. But, there is something about Biden, even if he is elected, that he also has that gut instinct about Turkey and its role in the world. And I would say that it would be similar. It would just be less, it would be the closeness with the Kurds and the YPG. I think that kind of remnant would still be there. They'd try to, because these people believe in American primacy. The United States can be involved in conflicts everywhere in the world. And Trump has a fundamental world philosophy that's different. And it's basically the whole idea of retrenchment. And when you're retrenching, you're going to need regional allies. And this is something very similar happened during the Nixon era when we pulled out of Vietnam. The United States began a period of retrenchment, but didn't mean we just ended our involvement in the world. It means that you start drawing on regional allies like Turkey to help play a role. And I think this is a perfect case. Libya is a perfect case of where Libya could become the policeman of the Eastern Med, much to the regret of a lot of countries that are neighbors of Turkey. But that's, as Mr. Defensa Carr said, do the math. I mean, this is an issue where Turkey has been investing in. It's developing a modern navy. And it's got the naval power and an aircraft carrier that's coming online in December to back it up. So I think, all right. I think this is important.
Yes. All right. Unfortunately, gentlemen, we're out of time. Thank you very much for joining us on Straight Talk.